I am Alexander Sterling, 32 years old, and my own father destroyed my career to protect his ego. Before I tell you about the envelope that changed everything, tell me where you are watching from in the comments. I really want to know who is with me on this journey. The air conditioning in the waiting room of the Meridian Development Corporation was humming, but I was sweating. Not because of the heat, but because this was the first interview I had secured in 2 years. 2 years of silence. 2 years of seeing my resume, a resume that included a summa cum laude degree from Yale, thrown into the trash bin of every major firm in the tri-state area. I adjusted my tie. It was cheap, bought off the rack at a discount store, a far cry from the Italian silk ties my father used to force me to wear for family portraits. I looked at the receptionist. She didn't look up. To her, I was just another applicant, another guy in a cheap suit hoping for a break. But I wasn't just another guy. I was a Sterling. In the world of architecture, that name meant royalty. It meant skyscrapers in Manhattan, museums in Chicago, and luxury resorts in Dubai. But to Richard Sterling, the patriarch of that empire, I was a thief. The heavy oak doors opened. A woman stepped out, Catherine Monroe, the CEO of Meridian. She was a legend in this industry, known as the Iron Lady of Development. She didn't just build buildings. She built cities. She was 60, elegant, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob that looked dangerous enough to cut glass. She didn't call my name. She just looked at me. Her eyes scanned me from my scuffed shoes to my nervous hands. "Alexander," she said. It wasn't a question. "Ms. Monroe," I stood up, extending a hand. "Thank you for... save the pleasantries." She cut me off, turning back into her office. "Get in here." I walked in. The office was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. But what caught my eye wasn't the view. It was what sat in the center of her glass desk. An old, yellowed envelope, sealed with red wax. My breath hitched. I knew that wax seal. I hadn't seen it in 15 years, but I would recognize the crest of the sterling silver stamp anywhere. It wasn't the company logo. It was my grandmother's personal seal. Catherine sat down and gestured for me to do the same. She didn't open a file. She didn't ask for my portfolio. She just tapped a manicured fingernail on the envelope. "Your father called me this morning," she said, her voice unreadable. "He told me that hiring you would be a grave error in judgment. He said you have sticky fingers, that you embezzled funds from the family trust, that you are a liability." My stomach dropped. He was still doing it. Even after 2 years, Richard Sterling wouldn't let me breathe. "It's a lie," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "I never stole a dime." Catherine leaned back. "I know what Richard says, Alexander. I've heard his version of the story for years. The narrative of the prodigal son who betrayed the family." She paused, her eyes locking onto mine. "But stories have 2 sides. And Eleanor Sterling was a woman who prepared for everything." She pushed the envelope toward me. "Open it." As I reached for the envelope, my hand trembling slightly, the room faded away. I wasn't in a high-rise office anymore. I was back in the library of the Sterling estate 15 years ago. The smell of old paper and expensive scotch filled my nose. The day my life effectively ended, though I didn't know it at the time. It started with a laptop. I was a sophomore at Yale. I needed a specific workstation to run the rendering software for my final project. It cost $3,147. For a family like ours, that amount was less than what my mother spent on a handbag. I had asked my father for the money a week prior. He had waved his hand, distracted by a phone call, and said, "Handle it, Alexander. Take it from the petty cash in the study. Just leave a receipt." So I did. I took the cash, left a detailed receipt, and bought the machine. I was excited. I stayed up all night rendering a design for a sustainable community center. I felt for the first time that I was becoming an architect. 3 days later, I came home for Sunday dinner. The entire extended family was there. My aunts, uncles, cousins, and, of course, my younger brother, Julian. Julian was the golden boy. He was 2 years younger, studying interior design at a mediocre college where he spent more time partying than studying. But to my father, Julian was perfect. Julian was charming. Julian knew how to laugh at my father's bad jokes. I walked into the dining room, expecting the usual tension, but the silence was heavy, suffocating. "There he is," my father said. He didn't stand up. He sat at the head of the table, cutting a piece of steak with surgical precision. "The thief." I froze. "Excuse me?" "The petty cash box is short $3,000, Richard said, not looking up. "I left a receipt, Dad," I said, looking around the table. My mother, Victoria, was staring at her plate, her knuckles white as she gripped her fork. She knew. She had to know. "You told me to take it for the computer." Richard slammed his knife down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "I told you no such thing," he roared, standing up. His face turned that familiar shade of purple. "I told you to submit a request to the accountant. You went into my study, opened my private safe, and took cash without authorization. That is theft, Alexander." "Dad, you're lying?" I said, shock replacing fear. "You were on the phone with Mr. Henderson. You waved me off. You said, 'Do not call me a liar in my own house.'" He pointed a finger at me. "You stole from this family. You think because you go to Yale, because you think you're so smart, you can just help yourself? You have no respect for the money I earn." He turned to the family. "See? This is what arrogance looks like. He thinks he's entitled." My uncle cleared his throat. "Richard, maybe it's a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," Richard barked. He looked at me with pure disgust. "You want that computer? Fine. Keep it. But you will pay back every single cent. With interest. And you will work for it. No more allowance. No more tuition assistance from the personal account. You are on your own until you learn the value of $1. I looked at my mother. "Mom!" She finally looked up. Her eyes were wet, but she shook her head slightly. "Don't fight him," her eyes said. "It only makes it worse." That was the dynamic. Richard was the king and we were his subjects. If reality didn't match his mood, reality was wrong. "Fine," I said, my voice cold. "I'll pay you back." I walked out of that dining room and didn't return for months. I got 2 jobs. I worked as a barista in the morning and a library archivist at night. My grades slipped slightly, but I didn't care. I needed to clear my name. Took me 8 months. I saved every penny. I ate instant noodles. I skipped social events. When I finally had the $3,147 plus the arbitrary interest he calculated, I drove to his office. I walked past his secretary, marched into his office, and slammed a stack of cash on his desk. "Paid in full," I said. "I'm not a thief." Richard looked at the money, then at me. He didn't look proud. He looked annoyed. He looked like I had ruined his fun. "You think this makes us even?" he sneered. "You still have the stain, Alexander. Character isn't bought back with cash." I should have known then. It was never about the money. It was about control. He needed to break me because I was the only one who didn't worship him. I was the only one who cared about the art of architecture, not just the profit margins. I left his office thinking I had won. I thought I had proven my integrity. I was naive. I didn't realize that was just the opening shot of a war he planned to wage for the rest of my life. Back in Catherine Monroe's office, the memory faded. I looked down at the envelope. My father, he never let it go, I told Catherine. He used that story, that lie about the laptop, to poison every well in this city. Catherine nodded slowly. He did more than that, Alexander. He erased your grandmother's name from the company history. He took her designs, her vision, and claimed them as his own. And he tried to do the same to you. She pointed at the wax seal again. Open it. It's time you knew what Eleanor was really doing while your father was busy building his kingdom of lies. I hooked my finger under the flap of the envelope. The wax cracked. Inside, there was a heavy iron key and a single sheet of paper. I pulled out the key. It was old, heavy, cold to the touch. The number 1247 was stamped into the metal. What is this? I whispered. That, Catherine said, a small smile playing on her lips, is the weapon your grandmother prepared for you. She knew this day would come. She knew Richard would try to bury you. So she dug a tunnel. I stared at the key. I remembered the day Grandma gave it to me. I was 12. She was sick, bedridden, but her mind was sharp as a tack. She had pressed something into my hand and made me promise not to tell my father. This was it. This was the contingency plan. Go to the First National Bank on 5th and Main, Catherine instructed. Box 1247. Whatever is in there, it's yours. And Alexander. I looked up. When you come back, she said, her voice hard as steel, bring everything. We have a war to win. I stood up, clutching the key so hard it cut into my palm. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a sterling, the real kind. But before I could get to the bank, before I could unlock the secrets Eleanor left behind, I have to tell you how bad it got. You need to understand the depth of the hole my father threw me in. You need to know about the blacklist, the humiliation at the diner, and the moment I almost gave up on everything. Because without the darkness, you can't see the light. To understand why a simple key meant so much, you have to understand Eleanor Sterling. She wasn't just my grandmother. She was the only architect in the family who actually cared about buildings. My father, Richard, saw architecture as a ledger. Square footage multiplied by cost per foot equals profit. If he could use cheaper concrete and hide it behind expensive cladding, he would. He called it smart business. Grandma Eleanor called it soulless. The company, Sterling and Partners, was technically founded by my grandfather, but everyone knew Eleanor was the genius. She was the one staying up until 4 a.m. with drafting paper. She was the one on the construction sites in the 1970s, wearing a hard hat and yelling at contractors who tried to cut corners, back when women weren't supposed to be on sites at all. When I was a kid, the house was a war zone. Richard screaming at my mother, Julian screaming for attention. I would escape to the attic. That was Grandma's sanctuary. It smelled of graphite, cedar wood, and dried lavender. Come here, Alex, she would say, her voice rasping from years of smoking thin cigarettes. Look at this line. What does it tell you? I would peer at her blueprints. It's a wall. No. She'd tap the paper. It's a barrier. But look here where the light hits. A wall can also be a canvas. Architecture isn't about blocking people out. It's about guiding them through. Your father builds cages. We build wings. She taught me everything. How to read the topography of a site. How to respect the materials. How to listen to what a client wasn't saying. Richard wants to be a king, she told me once, staring out the attic window at the sprawling estate she paid for. He thinks the buildings serve him, but we serve the people who live in them. Never forget that, Alex. If you build for ego, it will crumble. If you build for people, it will stand forever. As she got older, Richard started pushing her out. He retired her. He moved her office to the basement. He took her name off the letterhead. He started claiming her designs were his. Mother is confused, he would tell clients. She's losing her touch. I had to redo all her work. I knew it was a lie. I saw him taking her sketchbooks. I saw him tracing her ideas and putting his signature in the corner. When I was 12, her health took a nosedive. The cancer was aggressive. Richard put her in a hospice facility quickly. Too quickly. He wanted her out of the house. He wanted full control. I used to ride my bike to the facility every day after school. One rainy Tuesday, she grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong for a woman who looked so frail. Alexander, she whispered. He's going to take it all. The company, the designs, the money. He's a hollow man, and hollow men are always hungry. I won't let him, I said, trying to be brave. She smiled sadly. You can't stop him. Not yet. You are a boy. He is a tank. But tanks run out of fuel. She reached under her pillow and pulled out a small velvet pouch. She pressed it into my hand. Take this. Do not show your father. Do not show your mother. This is for you. Only you. I opened the pouch. Inside was the key. Number 1247. What is it? I asked. It's a door he cannot lock, she said, her eyes intense. When the time comes, and you will know when that is, when you have nowhere else to turn, go to First National. Promise me. I promise, Grandma. She died 2 weeks later. The funeral was a farce. Richard gave a eulogy about legacy and family values, wiping away fake tears. He talked about how he would honor her memory by taking the company to new heights. I stood there, 13 years old, clutching the key in my pocket, wanting to scream. After the funeral, the erasing began. Richard renovated the house. He threw out her drafting table. He burned her old journals in the fireplace. I managed to save a few charcoal pencils, hiding them under my mattress like contraband. Julian, my brother, didn't care. He was happy because he got her room, which was bigger. Finally, he said, that old lady smell is gone. I almost punched him, but I remembered Grandma's words. Tanks run out of fuel. Over the next 10 years, I kept my head down. I focused on school. I got into Yale on my own merit, not on a legacy admission like Richard wanted. I wanted to prove I was good enough without his name. But Richard couldn't handle that. He needed me to need him. Every time I got an A, he asked why it wasn't an A+. Every time I won a student award, he scoffed. Student awards don't pay the bills. When the laptop incident happened, it wasn't just about money. It was his way of saying, you are nothing without my permission. And then came graduation. The day that was supposed to be my triumph turned into the beginning of my nightmare. I had graduated summa cum laude, top of my class. My thesis project, the urban lung, a design for a vertical garden skyscraper that filtered pollution, had been featured in an architectural digest. I stood on the stage wearing my gown, scanning the crowd. I saw my mother. She waved tentatively. Beside her, Richard was looking at his phone. He didn't even look up when my name was called. After the ceremony, we went to a high-end steakhouse. I thought maybe now he would respect me. Maybe now, with the degree in hand, I would be treated as an equal. We sat down. Richard ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than my first car. To the future, he toasted. To the future, I said, smiling. We have some changes coming at the firm, Richard announced, swirling his wine. Big changes. I'm appointing a new design director. My heart leaped. This was it. He was going to bring me in. He was going to let me work. Julian, Richard said, beaming at my brother. I choked on my water. Julian? Dad, Julian hasn't even graduated yet. And he's studying interior design, not architecture. He has the eye, Richard said dismissively. And he understands the brand. Julian smirked at me. Don't worry, bro. I'll need an assistant. Someone to handle the paperwork, fetch coffee, run prints. Dad and I agreed you'd be perfect for it. The world stopped spinning. Assistant, I repeated. I'm a licensed architect. I graduated top of my class at Yale. You want me to fetch coffee for Julian? It's an entry-level position, Richard said coldly. You have to pay your dues. And considering your history with handling finances, we can't trust you with anything significant yet. It's unpaid for the first 6 months, of course. Probationary period. I looked at my mother. She was studying the tablecloth again. No, I said. Richard stopped eating. Excuse me? No, I said louder. I am not going to work unpaid for my younger brother. I am not going to be your errand boy. I'm going to get a job at a real firm. A firm that respects talent. Richard laughed. It was a cruel, dry sound. A real firm? You think anyone in this town will hire you without my blessing? I am the industry in Connecticut, Alexander. I'll take my chances, I said, standing up. I'd rather flip burgers than work for you. If you walk out that door, Richard hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You are cut off. No money, no contacts, and I will make sure you never draw a straight line in this state again. Watch me, I said. I threw my napkin on the table and walked out. I felt free. I felt invincible. I had no idea that Richard wasn't making an idle threat. He was making a promise. And unlike his promises to be a good father, this was one he intended to keep. Freedom tastes sweet, but it doesn't pay the rent. I moved into a shoebox apartment on the edge of town. It had a leaking faucet and walls so thin I could hear my neighbor sneezing. But it was mine. I set up my drafting table in the corner and started applying for jobs. I was confident. I had the portfolio. I had the grades. I had the ambition. I sent out 10 applications the first week. Top-tier firms. Places where my professors had contacts. Silence. Week 2. I sent out 20 more. Mid-tier firms. Boutiques. Rejection emails started trickling in. Thank you for your interest, but we are not hiring at this time. Your style isn't a fit. I was confused. My portfolio was versatile. I called a few friends from Yale. They had all landed jobs. Even the guys who barely passed Structural Engineering 101 were working at decent firms. Month 3. My savings were drying up. I started applying to entry-level drafting jobs. The kind of work I could do in my sleep. I got an interview at a small firm, Miller & Associates. Mr. Miller was a nice guy, older, looked tired. He looked through my portfolio and nodded. "This is impressive work, son. Really impressive," he said. "Thank you, sir. I'm ready to work hard." He looked at my resume again, then froze. He saw the name, Alexander Sterling. His face changed. He closed the portfolio. "I'm sorry," he said, standing up abruptly. "We can't hire you." "But you just said the work was impressive." "It's not about the work," he said, avoiding my eyes. "It's internal politics. I can't. Please leave." I walked out to the parking lot and sat in my beat-up Honda Civic. I called Professor Vance, my mentor at Yale. He had always been in my corner. "Professor," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "Something is wrong. No one will hire me. Even the small firms are shutting the door." There was a long silence on the other end. "Alex," Vance sighed, "I was hoping you wouldn't call." "What do you mean?" "I had a lunch meeting yesterday with the partners at SKM Architects," Vance said. "Your name came up. They told me, 'Look, your father has been making calls.'" "Calls?" "He's calling everyone, Alex. Every firm owner, every head of HR. He's telling them that you were expelled from the family trust for embezzlement. He's saying you have a gambling problem. He's implying that if anyone hires you, Sterling and partners will pull out of any joint ventures or subcontracting deals. He's strong-arming the entire state." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. "He's telling them I'm a thief?" "He's telling them you're toxic. He's blacklisting you, Alex. Effectively and totally." I dropped the phone. It wasn't just rejection. It was sabotage. Systematic, calculated destruction of my livelihood. I applied to firms in New York, New Jersey, Boston. But the architecture world is smaller than it looks. The rumors had spread. Alexander Sterling is damaged goods. Don't touch him. By month 6, I was broke. I sold my watch. I sold my drafting table. That hurt the most. I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor. I had to eat. I had to pay rent. So, Alexander Sterling, Yale graduate, summa cum laude architect, put on a stained apron and started waiting tables at the Rusty Spoon, a diner off the highway. It was humbling. No, it was soul-crushing. My boss, Elena, was a tough Greek woman with a heart of gold. She didn't care about my last name. She cared that I showed up on time and didn't drop the plates. "You look sad today, Alex," she'd say, slapping a plate of pancakes on the counter. "Cheer up. It's just food." "It's not just food, Elena," I'd mutter. "It's my life." I spent a year and a half there, smelling like grease and old coffee. I learned to balance 4 plates on one arm. I learned to smile at rude customers who didn't tip. Every day I hoped my father would stop. I hoped he would get bored. But Richard Sterling held grudges like other people held stocks, expecting them to grow over time. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I was wiping down table 4. The bell above the door jingled. I looked up and froze. A sleek, black Rolls-Royce Phantom was idling outside, the rain glistening on its hood. The driver opened the back door. Richard stepped out. Then Julian. Then a woman I recognized instantly. Sarah, my ex-girlfriend. The one who broke up with me 2 weeks after I was cut off, citing irreconcilable differences about our future financial stability. They walked in. The diner went quiet. They looked like aliens in their designer coats and Italian leather shoes, standing on the sticky linoleum floor. Richard scanned the room, a look of utter disdain on his face. Then his eyes locked on me. He smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator finding a wounded animal. "Table for 3, Richard announced loudly. "And we want the Yale graduate to serve us." My blood ran cold. He had brought them here on purpose. He knew. He had probably been tracking me the whole time, waiting for the perfect moment to twist the knife. Elena looked at me, concerned. "Alex, you want me to take this?" "No," I said, tightening my apron strings. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to stop. "I'll do it." I grabbed the menus and walked over. This was the test. This was what Grandma warned me about. He will try to break you. Don't let him. I walked up to the table. "Welcome to the Rusty Spoon," I said, my voice flat. "Can I get you started with drinks?" Julian laughed. He was wearing a Rolex that probably cost more than this entire building. Sarah wouldn't look at me. She was busy examining her manicure. "I'll have a sparkling water," Julian said. "With lime. Do you have lime here? Or is it just tap water?" "We have lime," I said. "Coffee," Richard said. He looked me up and down. "You look tired, Alexander. The service industry must be demanding." "It's honest work," I replied. "Honest?" Richard chuckled. "Yes. Well, it's certainly fitting for someone with your skill set. Tell me, do you miss the drafting table? Or have you found your true calling wiping up ketchup?" I gripped the notepad. "What do you want, Dad?" "I'm here to offer you a lifeline," Richard said, leaning in. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Come home. Admit you were wrong. Apologize to the family. Sign a statement admitting to the theft. And I will give you a job in the mailroom. Minimum wage. But it's better than this." He gestured around the diner as if it were a garbage dump. I looked at him. I looked at Julian, who was smirking. I looked at Sarah, who finally glanced up with pity in her eyes. Pity. I hated it more than the hate. "I didn't steal anything," I said loud enough for the next table to hear. "And I would rather scrub toilets in this diner for the rest of my life than sign a lie for you." Richard's face hardened. "Have it your way. Enjoy the mediocrity, Alexander. It's all you'll ever have." They ordered the cheapest things on the menu. They ate slowly, making me refill their water every 5 minutes. When they left, Julian threw a single crumpled dollar bill on the table. "Keep the change, bro," he said. I watched the Rolls-Royce pull away. I stood there, clutching that dollar bill until my knuckles turned white. I went to the back alley and screamed. I screamed until my throat was raw. But then, something shifted. The despair evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard rage. I wasn't going to just survive. I was going to destroy him. I went back inside. I finished my shift. And that night, I took out a fresh pad of paper. I didn't have a computer powerful enough for CAD anymore. So I picked up a pencil. Grandma's way. There was a contest coming up. The National Architecture Innovation Award. It was blind judging. No names. Just designs. I was going to enter. And I was going to win. The encounter at the diner lit a fire under me, but it also revealed something crucial. While serving them, I had noticed something sticking out of Julian's designer bag. It was a sketchbook. Julian never sketched. He claimed digital was the only way forward. But curiosity got the better of me. When he went to the bathroom, I had dropped a napkin near his bag and picked it up, glancing inside the open book. The sketches weren't Julian's style. Julian drew jagged, modern, aggressive lines. These drawings were fluid, organic, full of light. They looked like Grandma's work. I realized then that my father wasn't just blocking me. He was mining the archives of a dead woman to prop up his incompetent favorite son. Julian was presenting Grandma's unused concepts as his own genius. That night, in my cramped apartment, I pinned the flyer for the Innovation Award on the wall. The theme was resilience. Resilience. It was laughable. My life was a case study in resilience. I had 4 weeks to design a complex. The grand prize was $50,000 and a contract with a top developer. I didn't care about the money, though I desperately needed it. I cared about the contract. It was the only way to bypass Richard's blockade. I worked like a man possessed. I pulled double shifts at the diner to pay for printing costs, then stayed up until 5 a.m. drawing. I designed a resilient center, a flood-proof, self-sustaining community hub that could survive hurricanes. It was inspired by the way mangrove roots held the soil together. If I can't be a wall, I'll be a root, I thought. I'll hold on when the storm comes. I submitted the project under the pseudonym E.S. Eleanor Sterling. The waiting was agony. 2 months passed. I kept wiping tables. I kept dodging my landlord. Then the email came. I was scrubbing the grill at the diner when my phone buzzed. Subject: Finalist Notification, National Architecture Innovation Award. My hands covered in grease, I swiped open the screen. Dear E.S., we are pleased to inform you that your submission, The Mangrove, has been selected as one of the 3 finalists. The final interview will be held at the headquarters of our partner, Meridian Development Corporation. Meridian, Catherine Monroe's company, the biggest player in the game. I almost dropped the phone into the fryer. I requested the day off. Elena, sensing something was up, gave me her blessing. Go get M. Tiger, she said. That brings us back to the moment in Catherine's office. The moment she handed me the key. I left Meridian with the key in my pocket and a fire in my belly. But I still had to face the reality of the situation. I had the interview, but I didn't have the job yet. And more importantly, I had to find out what was in box 1247. I took a bus to the First National Bank. It was an old building, one of the few my grandfather had actually designed before Richard took over and modernized everything with glass and steel. Felt like walking into a cathedral. I went to the safety deposit vault. The clerk, a severe-looking woman with glasses on a chain, checked my ID. Alexander Sterling, she read. She paused. We haven't seen a Sterling in this vault for a long time. Not since Eleanor. I'm here for her box, I said. Number 1247. She led me into the private room. It was quiet, the walls lined with thousands of metal drawers. She unlocked her side, then nodded for me to use my key. The lock clicked. The sound was loud in the silence. I pulled out the long metal box. It was heavy. I sat down at the table and opened the lid. My heart stopped. It wasn't just papers. It was a history. On top lay a leather-bound journal. I opened it. It was Grandma's handwriting. September 12, 2005. Richard is becoming impossible. He demands I sign over the rights to the Harbor View sketches. He threatened to cut off funding for Alexander's school if I didn't comply. I signed the dummy contract, but I have moved the intellectual property rights to the trust. I flipped the pages. October 4, 2005. I have set up the Eleanor Sterling Trust. The assets include all my designs from 1980 to present, and 51% of the voting shares of Sterling and Partners. I have hidden the existence of this trust from Richard. He thinks he inherited everything when my husband died. He is wrong. I retained the controlling interest. My hands shook. Richard didn't own the company. He never had. He had been acting as the CEO, but the majority shares, the controlling power, had been sitting in a dormant trust for 15 years. And then the final document. Last will and testament of Eleanor Sterling. To my grandson Alexander Sterling, I leave the entirety of the Eleanor Sterling Trust to be accessed upon his 25th birthday or upon the event of extreme duress caused by my son, Richard. This key is your sword, Alexander. Take back what he stole. I was 32. I had been eligible for 7 years. But I never knew. Under the papers there was a flash drive and a stack of photos. Photos of Richard with building inspectors, handing over envelopes of cash. Photos of cracks in the foundations of the Sterling Towers that Richard had covered up. This wasn't just an inheritance. This was a nuclear bomb. I sat there for an hour, absorbing the magnitude of it. My father wasn't just a bully, he was a fraud. He had been building his empire on land he didn't own, using designs he stole, and covering up safety violations that could kill people. I put everything back in the box except the will and the flash drive. I walked out of the bank. The sun was shining, but the world looked different. I wasn't the unemployed waiter anymore. I was the majority shareholder of the company that had blacklisted me. My phone rang. It was Catherine Monroe. "Did you open it?" she asked. "I did." "Good," she said. "Now come back to my office. We need to discuss the Harbor View Tower project." "And Alexander." "Yes. Your father is bidding on it too. He's presenting tomorrow. I want you to present right after him." "I'll be there," I said. I hung up. I looked at my reflection in a shop window. The cheap suit didn't matter anymore. The scuffed shoes didn't matter. I hailed a taxi. "Meridian Tower," I told the driver. "And step on it." The next 24 hours were a blur of strategy and caffeine. I met with Catherine Monroe and her legal team. When I showed them the documents from the safety deposit box, the room went silent. Robert Ashford, a lawyer who had been Grandma's confidant, but had been forced into silence by NDA agreements, wept openly. "I've been waiting for this," Robert said, wiping his glasses. "I drafted this trust with her. We locked it tight so Richard couldn't touch it. But we needed the beneficiary, you, to physically claim it with the key." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "We couldn't," Robert said. "The terms were strict. If we initiated contact, Richard could have contested the mental capacity of Eleanor. You had to come to us. You had to find the key." "Grandma played the long game," I whispered. "She knew Richard," Robert said grimly. "She knew he would push you until you had no choice but to look for an exit." Catherine interrupted, her business mode engaged. "The legal battle for the company will take months. Richard will fight the validity of the will. He'll drag it out. But we can hurt him where it matters right now. The Harbor View Tower. The Harbor View Tower was a $500 million project. It was the jewel of the city's redevelopment plan. Winning this contract would secure a firm's future for a decade. Losing it would be catastrophic, especially for Richard, whose company was leveraged to the hilt, as the flash drive revealed. "Richard is presenting a design called the Crystal Spire," Catherine said. "It's flashy, expensive, and completely unsustainable. He's banking on his name to win the bid." "I know the design," I said, remembering the sketches in Julian's bag. "It's not his. It's a bastardized version of Grandma's prism concept from 1998. Can you prove it?" "I can do better," I said. "I can show you the original. And I can present the evolution of that design, the one I've been working on for the Future Architect contest. The mangrove isn't just a concept. It's the solution for the Harbor View site. We worked through the night. I digitized Grandma's old journals. I overlaid my new renderings with her original sketches to show the lineage. It was a collaboration across time. The morning of the presentation arrived. The conference room at Meridian was packed. Board members, city officials, investors. Richard Sterling sat at the front, flanked by Julian and a team of nervous assistants. When I walked in, wearing a new suit Catherine had insisted on buying, "Consider it a signing bonus," she had said. The room shifted. Richard turned. His face went white, then red. He stood up and marched over to me, blocking my path. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed. "Are you delivering coffee?" "I'm presenting, Dad," I said calmly. "Presenting?" He laughed, but his eyes were darting around nervously. You're a waiter. You're a thief." "Richard," Catherine's voice cut through the room. She stood at the head of the table. "Please take your seat. Mr. Sterling is here at my invitation." "This is an insult," Richard sputtered. "I am Richard Sterling. I will not share a stage with this This disgrace. Then you can leave, Catherine said simply, and forfeit your bid. Richard ground his teeth. He glared at me. Make a fool of yourself then. I'll enjoy watching you fail. He sat down. Richard presented first. It was exactly what I expected. Pompous, grandiose, and full of buzzwords. Julian stood next to him, nodding like a bobblehead. The design was all glass and steel, completely ignoring the site's flood risks. The crystal spire will be a monument to human dominance over nature, Richard concluded. Polite applause. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium. I didn't have flashcards. I didn't have a laser pointer. My name is Alexander Sterling, I began. And I'm not here to talk about dominance. I'm here to talk about harmony. I brought up the first slide. It wasn't a rendering. It was a photo of the site during the flood of 2012. We can't fight the water, I said. We have to live with it. I unveiled the mangrove. The building wasn't a solid block. It was porous. It allowed wind and water to flow through the lower levels. It had vertical wetlands. It was beautiful, functional, and revolutionary. I saw the board members leaning in. I saw the city officials nodding. Then I played my ace. This philosophy, I said, looking directly at Richard, isn't new. It is the core of the Sterling legacy. A legacy that was started by the true founder of our family's vision, Eleanor Sterling. I clicked the remote. The screen changed. Side by side, Grandma's sketch from 1998 and my design today. I am simply finishing what she started, I said. The room was silent. Then Harold Webb, the chairman of the board, spoke up. That sketch, he pointed to the screen. That looks remarkably similar to the foundation concept Richard just showed us. I turned to Richard. Does it, Dad? Richard was sweating. It's a coincidence. Standard geometric principles. Is it? I clicked the next slide. It was a page from Grandma's journal, dated and notarized. Concept for harbor view, the prism. Note, Richard hates it. Says it uses too much green space. A murmur went through the crowd. You stole her work, I said, my voice steady. Just like you tried to steal my future. But you forgot one thing. You can steal a drawing, but you can't steal the vision. Richard stood up, knocking his chair over. This is preposterous. I am leaving. Come, Julian. Julian looked at his father, then at the screen, then at me. He didn't move. Julian, Richard barked. Sit down, Richard, Catherine said. Her voice was like ice. We haven't voted yet. Richard stood there, isolated, trembling with rage. The contract, Harold Webb announced, looking at the other board members who were all nodding, goes to Alexander Sterling and the Resilient Center. The room erupted in applause. Richard looked like he had been slapped. He turned to me, his eyes filled with venom. You think this is over? He whispered. I will bury you in lawsuits. You'll never see a dime. I will bankrupt you. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the flash drive I had taken from the bank. I held it up. I don't think you want to go to court, Dad, I said softly. Not with what's on this drive. The tax evasion, the bribes to the zoning commission in 2015, the cracks in the foundation of the Metro Hotel. Richard's face drained of color. He looked at the drive, then at me. He knew. He knew I had the nuclear codes. You wouldn't, he croaked. I'm your father. And she was your mother, I said. And I was your son. You didn't hesitate to destroy us. I put the drive back in my pocket. Go home, Dad. It's over. Richard Sterling, the giant, the tyrant, slumped. He looked suddenly old. He turned and walked out of the room, alone. Julian stayed in his seat, staring at the floor. Catherine walked over to me and shook my hand. Welcome to the team, partner, she said. I had won the battle, but the war for the family company and the confrontation with my mother and Julian was just beginning. Because winning a contract is business. Taking back a family, that's personal. Winning the Harborview contract was a massive victory, but I knew Richard Sterling. He wouldn't just crawl into a hole. He was a wounded animal and wounded animals bite. I moved into a temporary office at Meridian. Catherine gave me free rein. I hired a small team, mostly young architects who, like me, had been rejected by the big firms for being too experimental. We were a band of misfits and we were hungry, but I needed an ally on the inside. Someone inside Sterling and Partners. I thought about Julian. He had stayed seated when Richard stormed out, but Julian was weak. He followed the power. Right now, he was probably terrified of losing his allowance. No, I needed someone else. 3 days after the presentation, I got a text. Meet me at the cemetery. 9 p.m. No name, but I knew who it was. I drove to the family plot. It was raining again, fitting. I walked to Grandma Eleanor's grave. Standing there, holding a black umbrella, was my mother, Victoria. I hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. Not since the diner incident where she sat silently while Richard humiliated me. "Mom," I said, approaching cautiously. She didn't turn. She was staring at Grandma's headstone. "She hated lilies," Mom said softly. "Richard always sends lilies. She loved wildflowers." "I know," I said. Mom turned to me. She looked tired. There were lines around her eyes I hadn't noticed before. "I heard what happened at the presentation," she said. "Richard came home and destroyed the study. He smashed the vases. He hit the wall right next to my head." I clenched my jaw. "You need to leave him, Mom." "I know," she said. She reached into her purse. "But I couldn't leave empty-handed. Not after 30 years. She pulled out a thick file folder. "What is this?" "Richard thinks I'm stupid," she said, a bitter smile touching her lips. "He thinks I just arrange flowers and host dinners. He forgets that I used to handle the books before he hired that crooked accountant." She handed me the folder. "These are the copies of the real ledgers," she said. "Not the ones on the flash drive you found. Those are old. These are from last week. He's trying to liquidate the company assets. He's trying to move the money to an offshore account in the Caymans before you can claim the trust." I opened the file. It was all there. Wire transfers. Shell companies. He was gutting Sterling and Partners so that by the time I took legal control, I would inherit a corpse. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked. "Why now?" Mom looked at me, tears welling up. "Because I was a coward, Alex. When he accused you of stealing the laptop, I knew you didn't do it. I saw the receipt on the counter the day you bought it. I should have spoken up. But I was afraid of him. I let him hurt you to save myself." She reached out and touched my face. Her hand was shaking. "I can't change the past," she whispered. "But I can help you bury him now." "Thank you," I said. It wasn't full forgiveness, that would take time, but it was a start. "There's one more thing," she said. "Julian. What about him?" "He knows. He knows Richard is stealing the money. Richard promised him a cut if he keeps his mouth shut. Julian is planning to testify against you in the competency hearing for the trust. He's going to say Grandma was senile when she gave you the key." "Of course he is," I sighed. "But," Mom said, her eyes flashing, "Julian has a secret too. The degree he earned at that design college? He didn't earn it. Richard paid a ghostwriter to do all his assignments. I have the emails." She handed me a USB drive. "Use it," she said. "Save your brother from becoming his father. Break him if you have to, but don't let him turn into Richard." I took the drive. "I will." I drove back to Meridian. It was midnight. Catherine was still there, reviewing blueprints. "We have a problem," I said, throwing the file on her desk. "Richard is draining the company. We need to freeze his assets. Now." Catherine looked through the papers. "This is actionable. We can get an emergency injunction by morning. But we need a judge who hates Richard Sterling." "I know one," I said. "Judge Halloway. Richard built his vacation home and overcharged him by 200%. Catherine smiled. It was a shark smile. "Make the call." The next morning, the police arrived at Sterling and Partners. I wasn't there, but Marcus Chen, my new project manager and former rival, sent me a video. officers entering the lobby, Richard screaming about harassment, accounts being frozen, computers being seized. But the real showdown was yet to come. The board meeting. As the majority shareholder via the trust, which Robert Ashford had now legally activated with the emergency injunction, I called for a mandatory board meeting of Sterling and partners. The meeting was set for Friday. I spent Thursday preparing. I wasn't just going to fire Richard. I was going to dismantle his entire philosophy. Friday morning, I drove my beat-up Honda Civic to the headquarters of the company that bore my name. I parked in the spot marked CEO. I walked into the lobby. The receptionist, the same one who used to ignore me when I came to beg for my job back, looked up. Her eyes went wide. "Mr. Sterling," she stammered. "Mr. Alexander. They are waiting in the boardroom." I took the elevator up. The glass elevator that overlooked the city. Grandma had designed this atrium. She wanted it to feel like ascending into the clouds. Richard had covered the glass with heavy curtains to reduce glare. First order of business, I thought. Open the curtains. I walked into the boardroom. The table was full. 12 board members. Most of them were old men, cronies of my father. At the head of the table sat Richard. He looked haggard. His tie was loose. He was drinking scotch at 10 a.m. Julian sat next to him, looking pale. "You have some nerve," Richard spat as I entered. "Freezing my accounts? This is my company." "Correction," I said, tossing the trust documents on the table. "It's Grandma's company, and now it's mine." I stood at the opposite end of the table. "Gentlemen," I said to the board, "you have a choice today. You can go down with the captain of this sinking ship, facing charges of complicity in fraud, embezzlement, and negligence. Or you can vote for new leadership." "New leadership?" Richard laughed. "You? A waiter with a grudge. A waiter who just secured the Harborview contract," I countered. "While you lost it." The board members murmured. "Money talks, and I had the biggest contract in the city." "This is ridiculous," Julian piped up, his voice cracking. "He's mentally unstable. Grandma was crazy when she signed that. I can testify." I turned to Julian. I felt a pang of pity. He was just a kid in a costume. "Julian," I said softly, "don't do this. He's a thief." Julian shouted, echoing our father. "He stole the laptop. He stole the key." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the USB drive my mother gave me. "Julian," I said, "I know about the ghostwriter. I know about the fake degree. I have the emails between Dad and the service that did your homework for 4 years." Julian froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "If I release this," I said, "your degree is revoked. You'll be blacklisted for fraud. Your career is over before it started." I slid the USB across the table toward him. "But I don't want to destroy you," I said. "I want you to be free. Walk away, Julian. Walk away from him. He's using you." Julian looked at the USB. Then he looked at Richard. "Don't listen to him," Richard roared. "He's bluffing. You're my son. You're the heir." Julian looked at his father, really looked at him, for the first time in years. He saw the sweat, the desperation, the madness. Julian stood up. "Where are you going?" Richard screamed. "Sit down." Julian picked up the USB drive. "I hate interior design," Julian whispered. "I always wanted to be a chef." He turned and walked out of the room. "Julian," Richard howled. The door clicked shut. I looked at the board. All in favor of removing Richard Sterling as CEO and appointing Alexander Sterling as interim lead? Every hand went up. Even Richard's oldest friend, Mr. Henderson, raised his hand. "It's business, Richard," Henderson mumbled. Richard slumped in his chair. He looked small. The giant was just a man. A sad, angry, lonely man. "Get out," I said. Richard stood up. He tried to muster some dignity, adjusting his jacket. "You'll fail," he sneered. "You don't have the stomach for this. You're soft, just like her." "I hope so," I said. He left. I stood there, alone in the boardroom. I walked over to the window and pulled back the heavy curtains. Light flooded the room. Dust motes danced in the air. I took a deep breath. It smelled like victory, but it also smelled like work. I had the company. I had the contract. But the family was shattered. My mother was alone. My brother was lost. My father was an enemy who would never stop plotting. I looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. Grandma's chair. "Okay, Grandma," I whispered. "We got the keys back. Now, let's build something." Winning the boardroom vote felt like the end of the movie. The bad guy was gone, the hero had the keys, and the credits were supposed to roll. But real life doesn't have credits. It has consequences. And Richard Sterling was not the kind of man who left quietly. He practiced what generals call a scorched earth policy. If he couldn't rule the kingdom, he would burn it to the ground so no one else could live there. The morning after the vote, I walked into the CEO's office, my office. It was trashed. He hadn't just packed his things, he had destroyed them. Files were shredded. The hard drives on the main server had been wiped professionally. He had even taken the expensive ergonomic chairs and the coffee machine. It was petty, but it was calculated. He wanted me to start at zero. But the physical damage was nothing compared to the legal storm that hit 3 days later. I was on site at the Harborview project, wearing a hard hat and reviewing the foundation pours with the foreman, when a process server tapped me on the shoulder. "Alexander Sterling?" "Yes." He handed me a stack of papers thick enough to stop a bullet. "You've been served." I opened the first page. Richard Sterling versus Alexander Sterling, Eleanor Sterling Trust, and Sterling and Partners. He was suing me for corporate theft, elder abuse, claiming I manipulated Grandma, and defamation. He was also suing my mother for breach of marital contract and theft of private documents. He had frozen the company's operating accounts again. This time, not because he owned them, but because they were contested assets in pending litigation. I couldn't pay the contractors. I couldn't pay my staff. The Harborview project, my massive victory, ground to a halt before we had even poured the first concrete slab. Then came the media blitz. Richard went on a popular local talk show. I watched it from the break room of the paralyzed construction site, my stomach churning. There he was, sitting in a comfortable chair, looking like a broken, grieving father. He had lost weight. He had rehearsed the tears. "I built that company from nothing," Richard told the host, his voice trembling. "I gave my son everything. A Yale education, cars, a life of luxury. And how does he repay me? He conspires with his mother, who, God bless her, has been struggling with mental health issues, to steal it all. He threw me out on the street. My own son." The host looked sympathetic. "That must be heartbreaking, Richard." "It is," Richard sniffed. "But what hurts the most is the betrayal of his brother, Julian. Alexander bullied him out of the company. He threatened him. I turned off the TV. My hands were shaking. He was rewriting reality in real time, and people were believing him. Clients started calling, pulling their contracts. "We don't want to get involved in a family feud," they said. I was drowning. I had the title of CEO, but I had no money, no projects, and a reputation that was being shredded daily. I needed air. I drove to the one place Richard wouldn't look for me. A small, grimy food truck park on the south side of the city. I found Julian inside a truck called the Rolling Stove. He was wearing a grease-stained t-shirt, sweating over a flat-top grill, flipping burgers with a focus I had never seen him apply to a blueprint. "Hey," I said, leaning on the counter. Julian looked up. He flinched, expecting a fight. Then he saw my face. The exhaustion, the fear. "You look like hell, Alex," he said. "Thanks. You look happy." Julian shrugged, scraping the grill. "I made $100 in tips today. Honest money. Dad never gave me that. He just gave me allowances and insults. He's suing us, Julian. All of us. He's saying I bullied you." Julian laughed. A dry, sharp sound. "He called me yesterday. Told me if I came back and testified against you, he'd buy me a restaurant. A 5-star place in Manhattan." My heart stopped. If Julian flipped back, I was dead. What did you say? Julian plated a burger, added a perfectly caramelized onion, and slid it toward me. On the house. He leaned closer. I told him that I'd rather flip burgers in a parking lot than eat steak at his table ever again. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. But Alex, Julian wiped his hands on a rag. He's not just suing. He's sabotaging. Remember the Metro Hotel cracks? The evidence you have. Yeah. He's destroying the physical evidence. He hired a demo crew to go into the basement of the hotel tonight. Emergency repairs, he calls it. He's going to patch the cracks and bury the proof before the court inspectors can get there. I looked at my watch. It was 7 p.m. Thanks, Jules, I said. This burger is the best thing you've ever designed. Go get him, Julian said. I called Catherine Monroe. We need a camera crew, and we need the police. Tonight. We staked out the Metro Hotel. Sure enough, at midnight, a van pulled up. Men with jackhammers got out. Richard was with them, directing traffic, looking frantic. When they started drilling, we moved in. It wasn't a dramatic fistfight. It was sadder than that. The moment the police lights flashed, Richard didn't run. He just froze. He looked at the police, then he looked at me standing behind them with Catherine. He tried to play the CO card. This is my building. I am authorizing repairs. It's a crime scene, Richard, Catherine said, stepping into the light. And you're tampering with evidence. They didn't arrest him that night. White-collar crime moves slowly, but we got the footage. We got the injunction. The lawsuit lost its teeth the moment the judge saw Richard trying to destroy the evidence he claimed didn't exist. But Richard had one last move. The ultimate act of narcissism. The groundbreaking ceremony for the Harborview Tower was 2 weeks later. We had cleared the legal hurdles. The press was there. The mayor was there. It was my moment to officially present the Resilience Center to the world. I was on the podium giving my speech. My mother was in the front row, looking radiant in a blue dress, finally free of the shadow he cast. This building isn't just about steel and glass, I said into the microphone. It's about truth. It's about standing firm when the water rises. Suddenly, there was a commotion at the back of the crowd. Richard Sterling pushed his way through. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was disheveled, his eyes wild. He was holding a megaphone. Lies! His voice boomed, distorted by the speaker. He's a fraud. That design is stolen. That woman, he pointed at my mother, is a thief. The crowd gasped. Security moved in, but I waved them off. I looked at Richard. He wasn't a monster anymore. He was a pathetic, small man screaming at a building that was bigger than him. Let him speak, I said into the mic. The crowd went silent. Richard lowered the megaphone, surprised. He expected a fight. He expected me to yell back. Tell them, Dad, I said calmly. Tell them how you built your empire. Tell them about Grandma. Tell them about the cracks in the Metro Hotel. Or are you just here to ruin one last thing because you can't control it? Richard opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at the faces in the crowd. Former clients, city officials, even his old golf buddies. No one was looking at him with respect. They were looking at him with pity. He realized in that moment that he had lost the audience. The show was over. Then my mother stood up. She didn't need a megaphone. She walked over to him. The crowd parted for her. She stood toe-to-toe with the man who had silenced her for 30 years. Go home, Richard, she said clearly. You have no power here anymore. Richard looked at her. He looked at me. He looked at the hole in the ground where the foundation would be. He dropped the megaphone. It made a loud screech of feedback. He turned around and walked away. He walked past the security guards, past the cameras, and into the parking lot. He didn't get into a Rolls-Royce. He got into a taxi. I watched him go. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a heavy, deep relief. The war was over. The dragon hadn't been slain. He had just been rendered irrelevant. I turned back to the crowd. Now, I said, picking up the golden shovel. Let's build something real. 2 years later, I stood on the rooftop of the completed Harbor View Tower. It was early evening, and the sun was setting over the Connecticut River, turning the water into liquid gold. The building was alive. That's the only way to describe it. The vertical wetlands on the facade were blooming. The wind turbines integrated into the spire were humming quietly, generating enough power to run the entire lighting system. It wasn't just a building, it was an ecosystem. We had renamed the firm. Sterling and Partners was dead. The new sign on the door read, Eleanor and Associates. The elevator pinged behind me. I turned to see Julian walking out. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a chef's coat. "You're late," I smiled. "Service ran long," Julian grinned, handing me a container. Fresh focaccia, rosemary and sea salt, trying a new recipe for the bistro. Julian had opened the golden spoon on the ground floor of the tower. It was always packed. He was tired. His hands were covered in flour and burns. But he was the happiest I had ever seen him. He had stopped trying to build walls and started building flavors. "Mom is coming up," Julian said, chewing on a piece of bread. "She brought her new boyfriend." "The yoga instructor?" "No, the literature professor." "Keep up, Alex." We laughed. It was a sound that used to be foreign in our family. Laughter without an edge. Laughter without fear. My mother arrived a few minutes later. She looked 10 years younger. She was running the Eleanor Foundation, a nonprofit that gave scholarships to young architects from underprivileged backgrounds. She was using the money from the settlement. Richard had eventually settled out of court to avoid jail time, to fix the world he tried to break. "It's beautiful, Alex," she said, leaning against the railing, looking out at the city. "Your grandmother would have loved this view." "She designed it," I said, touching the key in my pocket. I still carried it. "I just built it." "And Richard?" she asked quietly. "I saw him last week," I said. I didn't tell her the details. I had seen him at a park downtown. He was sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons. He looked old. His hair was white and thinning. He wasn't destitute, he still had a pension and a small apartment, but he was alone. No entourage, no sycophants, no Rolls-Royce. I had watched him for 10 minutes from my car. I thought about getting out. I thought about yelling at him or maybe forgiving him, but I realized I didn't need to do either. He was just a man I used to know. The hate had evaporated, leaving only a dull indifference. He had chosen his life. I had chosen mine. He's existing, I told my mother. That's enough. Catherine Monroe joined us as the stars started to come out. She handed me a glass of champagne. "To the Architect of the Year," she toasted. "I haven't won it yet," I protested. "The envelope is on my desk," she winked. "I have my sources." We stood there, the four of us, a makeshift family forged in fire. I looked down at the city. I saw the lights of the diner where I used to scrub tables. I saw the old bank building where the key had waited for 15 years. I saw the path that had led me here. I realized that the blacklist hadn't destroyed me. It had defined me. It stripped away the entitlement, the ego, the easy path. It forced me to dig a foundation deep enough to hold up the sky. My phone buzzed. It was an email from a student at Yale. Subject: Advice. Dear Mr. Sterling, I'm a first-year student. My professor says my designs are too radical. My parents want me to switch to finance. I feel like quitting. What should I do? I smiled. I typed a reply. Don't quit. Draw the thing they say you can't build. And if they lock the door, find a window. Or better yet, build your own door. I put the phone away. What are you thinking about? Julian asked. I'm thinking, I said, looking at the horizon, that we need to start the next project. What is it? A school, I said, for kids who don't fit in. Place with no walls, just wings. I raised my glass. To Grandma. To Grandma, they echoed. The wind picked up, warm and strong. I closed my eyes and, just for a second, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Rough, smelling of graphite and lavender. I'm flying, Grandma, I thought, just like you said. I opened my eyes. The city was shining. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for approval. I was just looking at the view. This story wasn't just about architecture or a messy lawsuit. It was about the architecture of self-worth. We often let other people draft the blueprints of our lives. We let parents, bosses, or society tell us who we are. Richard Sterling represents that external voice. The one that says you are only valuable if you are profitable, obedient, or perfect. But Alex's journey teaches us a vital lesson. Your value is not an inheritance. It is a construction project. The blacklist is a gift in disguise. When the world shuts you out, it forces you to look inward. Alex became a better architect not at Yale, but at the diner where he learned humility and resilience. Rejection is often just redirection to a better path. Toxic family and breaking the cycle. Just because someone shares your DNA doesn't mean they deserve a seat at your table. Alex, Julian, and Victoria showed that you can break generational trauma. You can choose to be different. Julian chose happiness over prestige. Victoria chose voice over silence. The key is always with you. Grandma left a physical key, but the real key was the belief she planted in Alex. We all have that key. A talent, a passion, a truth that no one can take away. You just have to be brave enough to open the box. I want to hear from you. This story took us from a diner floor to a skyscraper rooftop. It was a long journey, and I appreciate every single one of you who read until the end. What is the door you are trying to open right now? Is it a new career? Leaving a toxic relationship? Or just learning to trust yourself? Let me know in the comments. Or, if this story helped you realize that you are the architect of your own life, simply comment good. That one word tells me that we are building this community together, one story at a time. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about justice, resilience, and finding the light. You are worth fighting for. Now go build something amazing.